Hello and welcome to Perspectives in Leadership. My name is Rami and Pierre. I'm with Break the Norm Leadership, and today we have with us Executive Leadership Coach Denise Conroy. Denise, hello, and how are you doing today?
Hello, I'm doing well. Friday, super. Can't complain. Can't complain. How are you?
I can't complain either. I have to admit, I'm still getting used to this fall weather. I'm here for it. I am this. We need Break the Norm Leadership sweaters because I feel like I need that in my toolkit.
I love that. Love
Let's get right into it because there's a lot of ground I want to cover today, and I know you have amazing things to share with all of us. But I want to start with you, and in a sense, get a sense of your origin story. I wonder if you can share with us your leadership journey. What I'm really interested in is like, what are the experiences, the jobs, or the people who you worked with that have somehow foreshadowed what you're doing now? I just want to see how you got here from there, wherever there was. Help us paint the picture.
I wish that I could tell you I had great mentors. I really, really do. I had blips of mentorship throughout my career. So I was in corporate America, always some sort of a for-profit space, for a little bit over 30 years total before I left to start my own executive coaching practice. And I just never got a mentor. Now, I will say that I think there's a couple things there. I was sexually assaulted when I was 5 years old
Mm.
by a group of teenagers in my neighborhood. And I kept it, these teenagers were probably 15 to 18 years old. So certainly old enough to know better. I kept it to myself though, because I had a very dysfunctional, messy family. My mom had a lot of small children very, very quickly in rapid succession. And somehow, even as a pretty sharp 5-year-old kid, I knew that my mom didn't need me to come in and dump my trauma on her. I also didn't want to tell my dad. My dad was a really violent guy. He was an alcoholic. We lived in an apartment complex. He would literally get into fistfights with people over like parking spaces and stuff. He was just like a rocket, right? Very, very angry guy. So I kept that secret from the time that I was 5 up until I was 43 years old. I was 43 working at, didn't tell a soul. I was working at HGTV. I was the chief marketing officer, and my life literally exploded. My marriage fell apart. I'd been married to my what I thought was my college sweetheart. Now I know that's not entirely true. I wanted to believe it, right? For 20 years. That marriage fell apart. He had an affair with my real estate agent, our real estate agent. We bought our house in Knoxville. I became an alcoholic because I was being mobbed, harassed, and bullied at work. Oddly enough, my lead harasser was the head of HR, and she was at my level. You think you can't get bullied by someone at your level? You absolutely can, especially like her. She had been there for 20 some years, so she had a lot of tenure. And so it wasn't until my life started to fall apart, I go to therapy. I start to love myself, I start to embrace. So when I look back on my career, part of the reason I think I didn't have mentors is I never showed anybody who I actually really was. Was I good at doing the work? Yes. My performance was stunning. I mean, I could work anybody into the ground, and I was very proud of it. I was very tough, you know? But I think also because of those things, it made it hard for me to really settle anywhere, fit in. I mean that in the best possible way, right? I jumped jobs a lot in my early days, and I had a really hard time settling in and feeling satisfied and feeling fulfilled. And so much of that, I think, was because I was out of touch with myself. And I also, because I was completely out of touch with myself, I had numbed my emotions. I couldn't connect with other people. So I really didn't thoroughly and appropriately connect with other people until after I left HGTV. So after I left HGTV, I became a CEO. And thank God, because who wants a CEO who's a toxic ass mess, right? So once I had gone to therapy, I became so much just more of a decent human being. It's probably for lack of a better phrase. I was able to see other people. I could give them the benefit of the doubt. I was no longer trying to be the toughest person in the room. There are no awards for that, by the way. And I think that I also figured out that doing your job, whatever it is, I started out as a market research analyst, and I was really good at cranking out analysis and presentations and spreadsheets and all the things. Doing your job only gets you so far, the nuts and bolts of it. And once you get to a certain stage, especially as an exec, it's about your diplomacy. It's about how you show you care for other people. And consider up until that point where the make or break, right? I didn't show I cared for other people very well. I didn't know how.
Wow. Okay. Denise, first of all, I want to just acknowledge how amazing it is that you can be vulnerable and transparent about
Thank you.
what you've gone through, lived through, worked through to get to where you are. So thank you. It's not, I cannot imagine it's easy to talk about sexual assault, even if I get the sense you've talked about it before, but I just
I
want to acknowledge that that's a big deal every single time.
yeah,
And I want to like do a couple of follow-ups if I could,
please.
particularly around the love yourself comment. There are and therapy, because I can imagine there are some leaders who might think therapy is just a is feelings ball, like,
Yeah.
um, but can you talk a little bit more about loving yourself means, because you gave some clues about being authentic, being able to show up, being able to connect, and connecting that to the importance of at a certain level, CEO, and I'm going to put some words into your mouth. You're graded not Your scorecard is not just what you do, but what the people you work with do. So if you can't connect with them, then will that show up on your scorecard? But overall, can you just talk about what loving yourself meant in a way that folks who might assume it's just all about feelings understand that it's really about something else?
Yeah, I think first of all, it's about connecting to yourself in a self-aware and honest way. Like before I went to therapy, I was not tremendously self-aware. Now, I thought I was. I remember somebody saying to me in a performance review, "You're not super self-aware." And I was like, "How dare you?" Like cuz I'd always been this real I was a smart kid. Like I could read when I was 4 years old. By the time I was 7, I read on a 12th grade level. I used to steal my mother's library books. She loved Stephen King and then I did too. So I was sharp, but I was sharp intellectually. I was not sharp emotionally, and that carried through. So for when you say love yourself, first I got to know myself. I got to know literally like what triggers me, what do I find to be too much? Then I can even get into what are my biases? We all have them, right? And if I can be somewhat honest with myself, then once I'm interacting with other people, I can be honest with them, right? And I can see them fully. I can ask them thoughtful questions to try to see them when I don't entirely understand what makes them tick. And I think for me, that was so critical to your point, being a CEO, because you got to get people as a CEO or even as an executive to buy into your vision. And you're not gonna win any hearts and minds if people think that you're a sociopath or if people think she doesn't care about me, all she cares about is money, right? And to be fair, I think a lot of my earlier days in my career, it was all about me, right? I was that very, and I never recognized how much until recently, because I've gone on this anti-racist journey, because I feel like I'm capable to go on an anti-racist journey because I'm at peace with myself. But I never recognized how much white supremacy culture affects this weird, uber competitive way. Now, we as Americans are like, it's just the American way. We're very competitive. And I was that person too. Like, and I grew up in that family where it was like, if you didn't win the ball game, you're a loser. If you didn't get all A's, you suck. And I took that in, right? And I
Mm.
would go around like literally bashing myself nonstop in my head. And I think that just was so unhealthy. And so for me, it was about sort of unraveling all that and sort of figuring out how we all can win together, right? Which becomes it's the antithesis of scarcity. White supremacy loves scarcity. So that's been a whole learning for me where I'm like, oh, now I get it.
Oh, and we're about to get into your actions and philosophy thoughts around activism, white supremacy, racism in a moment. I do want to double click on this definition that you're giving us around what loving yourself means, because as you're describing it, it really sounds like emotional intelligence. To be able to
Yes.
like, do I know myself? Can I regulate myself?
Can I regulate?
Can I understand other people, connect with them? And then can I manage those relationships in a way that are healthy for them and for me?
Yep.
And I love that you pointed out that someone who is super smart, because I do think you as an incredibly smart person, can still be emo have suboptimal levels of emotional intelligence.
Yes. Oh my gosh, my emotional intelligence was so low for somebody who purported to be so smart. And I think you talked about therapy being just a feely thing, right?
Yeah.
Feelings are hard. I mean, for somebody like me, intellect is easy. Feelings are hard. And I think a lot of human beings are this way, by the way. And so feeling feeling hurts to be able to say to yourself, somebody sexually assaulted me and that deeply saddened me and hurt me. It impacted me. There's a sort of there's more courageousness in feeling your feelings than not feeling your feelings. And I know because I spent 38 years not feeling my feelings.
A way that someone once put it to me, a therapist that I read some of his work, is that until you do the work and manage your feelings, you don't have them, they have you.
Yes, absolutely true. And we see that, because I worked at HGTV, it was such a toxic environment. And I've come to recognize from my time at HGTV, from my time at all the places I've worked, and then as a CEO, we all bring our baggage to work. And it's so ironic to me. You'll hear people say, I leave that stuff at home. You're not capable. None of us are capable of fully leaving the bags at home. So we bring it and then we dump it all over everybody else, right? And it's sort of interesting because in my coaching practice, I one of the screener questions I ask when I do a consult, I ask if you've been to therapy before. And if you haven't, I won't take you as a client
Why is that?
because I feel like folks who have not yet been to therapy, and let's face it, most of my clients are at least 40. They're more likely my age. I'm 52. If you haven't been to therapy at this point in your life, I feel like you're avoiding something.
Hmm,
Right. And I'm pleasantly surprised at how many people in my generation actually have. And I give them a lot of credit for that.
all right, that is impressive. All
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Um, all right. So thank you for giving us a sense of sort of the formative experiences and thoughts that have gotten you from where you were to where you are now and doing what you're doing now. I want to talk a little bit about what you're doing now. I want to talk a lot about it. I want us to talk a lot about it, but I want to start with the social media piece because that's where people might know, have seen, or heard of you first. On social media, you are doing a lot of what we believe at Break the Norm Leadership is really great work around calling out and calling in people around human rights issues, white supremacy, racism, sexism. Um, and I'm just curious if you could talk to us about how you got involved doing that work and how you've been using that platform for good.
So it's a great question. It's really interesting how I got involved in it. So I grew up in a weird family. Weird in that I grew up in Charleston, West Virginia, actually a little town outside of it called St. Albans. And my father was my primary caretaker. My parents were married, but he was Mr. Mom in a time in the 70s where Mr. Mom was not normal. He had just got back from 2 tours of Vietnam. He had volunteered for both because from where he came from, poor neighborhood on the north side of Pittsburgh, Vietnam seemed nice to him, right? So he gets to Vietnam and he's like, my dad was a really smart guy, although he wasn't educated yet. He was very smart. And he's like, this is a mess. He had been raised in a very racist household, Irish, white Irish American. And he was like, we are all getting played. He's like, we are over here fighting for Uncle Sam. We are all getting played. So he came back a very changed person and he was going to school on the GI Bill. My mom was working. She'd already graduated from college when they met. And so my parents were very, very liberal in a
Mm,
place where people were not very liberal, even back then. We didn't own guns. My father wouldn't allow it. We were probably the only people in our town that didn't have guns, right? So I always thought I was pretty, I'll use this word woke. I thought I was pretty woke, right? I think if you would ask my parents, they were too. Then I'm in corporate America for all those years. George Floyd happens. George
mm,
Floyd is murdered. And I think because of the pandemic, life had slowed down, and I finally saw the world as it was for the first time. Granted, I was also a ton of white privilege, so it was easy for me to, like avoid that. And
mm.
when I saw him calling for his mom, I was like, this is so incredibly wrong. And I was a second time CEO. We were one of the first organizations to put out, at least in our region in the Northeast, to put out a statement saying this is ridiculous. We raised money for the NAACP. We did some things. And I had all kinds of customers that were like, it was a paint and sip, believe it or not. And I had customers that were like, I'll never come to your paint and sip again. And I'm like, good, I don't care. Right. Bye-bye. I had more customers because we had quite a few African-American customers say, thank you for saying something. Right. And I was like, it's the very least we can do. Right. Literally, it's the least we can do. So for me, that tipped off my curiosity. At this point, I'm more I'm more of a whole person on the inside. and I'm willing to self-interrogate. And as I started to self-interrogate, I started to read Kendi and, Kimberly Crenshaw and sort of all the different, I mean, I have this like huge list that I give to people, my anti-racist reading list. And it's got everything on it. It's got the nonfiction, 1619 Project. It's got fiction, James Baldwin. I ran through James Baldwin, like all the works of, right? And because I think fiction reinforces what you learn from nonfiction. Fiction, I think, is super important. So I ended up doing all this reading, and once I did and started to self-interrogate, I was like, man, my family wasn't as woke as I thought they were, right? Like we still like said racist things in the house I grew up in, my dad did. I mean, but on one hand, he had Malcolm X like stuff all over the house, and he loved Angela Davis. And I remember I won an academic decathlon for reciting the I Have a Dream speech, right? Like, so it was such a it's duality. And I think one of the things I've learned in anti-racism work is people aren't just good or bad. We're like a lot of things rolled into a big old mess, right? And if you look at the world purely as me good, you bad, it's pretty hypocritical. So I had to interrogate my own hypocrisy. I had to really get into understanding, yeah, I'm a racist. Grew up in a racist society, grew up with all these different systems. I'm a sexist too, by the way. There were different, once you start unraveling all the isms, you're like, oh, damn. I never had an anti-Semitism problem. Like everybody's got different like hot buttons. I definitely had a homosexuality. Like I didn't understand it. I wasn't as, so it just leads you through one door and then you go through the next door and the next door. And it's one of those things that it's never done. Like you don't go to a destination and you're like, I am now an anti-racist, right? All you really are promising to do is self-interrogate yourself and I'm kind of clinical with myself. Like I'm a petri dish and I'll do things and I'm like, did you do this because such and such is really happening? Or did you do it because it's a person who is of another race or who is, just holding yourself accountable, I think is really what it's all about.
Huh, okay. So many places to dive in. I
Yeah,
think I want to start with near something you said near the end there, around the work is never done.
never done.
How, how do you find, how do you avoid, and actually, I don't want to make the assumption,
Yeah,
to what degree is that exhausting to you versus energizing? Because I can imagine a world where, all right, I've confronted my inner sexism, something
yeah,
that I completely admit. It's all these isms are the water we live in, so we had to have drunk some of it at some point. But once I confront my racism, I'm sort of got that managed and regulated. I go on to my next ism, and my next ism, like, how is that not just depressing for you or for others, but clearly, yeah, because it energizes you. Like, what happened, or what's the alchemy there?
I think for me, I'm temporary. I don't think anything's permanent. And I'm starting to, the older I get, nothing is permanent. Even when I look at suffering, like so much suffering around the world. I look at the suffering happening in Palestine right now. And in my bones, I know that won't be forever. I know it won't be. What is it? The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends
Oh,
towards
yeah.
justice. I have a
Hmm.
necklace that says that. I love that. It's one of my favorite quotes. And like I just know I'm not bothered by it because there's sort of an intellectual, like I'll do something and I'm like spidey sense, like interesting, right? And it's been interesting because my husband, whether he wanted to or not, has gone on the journey. We'd probably be divorced by now if he didn't want to go on the journey, but he's gone on the journey too. And it's interesting because we'll be somewhere and we'll look at each other and be like, was that racist? And we'll be like, mm-hmm. And we'll sort of have that mind meld. So I think for me, I find it curious and intriguing and I just think I think of myself as an unfinished work. Like I'm never going to be finished, you know? And some days that work looks real ugly. Sometimes there's nothing on it. Sometimes it's more beautiful than others, right? So I'm okay with it. I find it to be, I don't know, kind of intellectually stimulating.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I'm gonna ask a question, which is it's a leading question.
Yeah.
Do you feel as if your best days are ahead of you, or do you feel like they're behind you? Because
Ahead. Ahead. Well, I gotta feel ahead because then I'd be like, oh man, like I totally ahead of me. Because I know for a fact there's all kinds of stuff hiding in me that probably hasn't surfaced yet. So I
Hmm.
gotta think. And two, as the world around me changes, right? So many of these isms are a response to change and we don't love it. So there's probably all kinds of stuff that's going to surface in the coming years that I don't even know, you know?
Yeah. The reason why I asked if your best days are ahead is because an idea I've been playing with is that people who are comfortable with themselves as works in progress tend to believe that's okay because their best days are ahead of them, as opposed to if they were behind and
True.
they're an unfinished work. I would imagine that's sort of the exhausting piece or the depressing piece.
I like myself so much better as an older person. It sounds weird and people say it a lot. I'm more confident, I'm more courageous, I'm also more I'm okay being confident about the stuff I don't know in terms of saying, I don't know,
Yeah.
right? Like I just don't know. Let's find out, right? And I spend a lot of time down different rabbit holes educating myself. And a lot of times I said to someone the other day, re-educating myself. Palestine is a really good example. I was
Yeah.
raised like everybody else here in the United States that's Christian and white to think that if you came from the Middle East and you weren't somebody who was from Israel, right, or Israeli, you were probably a terrorist, right? Now, I absolutely know that not to be true now, but I had to go down a rabbit hole of research to re-educate myself about why that's not true. What is the history of it? I saw somebody on a podcast the other day said history is the most subversive thing you can study, and I think it's absolutely true.
Hmm. I like that.
I did
Um,
too.
I do want to get to social media, but I
Yeah,
have to ask the question about your husband.
yeah,
Like, it sounds like what you have is a partnership in the best sense of the word. Like, I'm assuming all the romantic partnership stuff, but what you've been speaking about is somebody who's like on the same wavelength as you.
yeah,
Does how much easier does that make doing the work that you do, having like someone who gets you and who thinks like you around all of these issues? Like, I just want to get a sense of leaders often think of that the it's a solo sport. You know,
yeah,
no one gets it. It's like no one can understand me. I have no peers, no peers to talk to.
yeah.
But it sounds like it's not quite that way for you in terms of the work that you're doing.
No, it's interesting because you do when you go down this road of anti-racism, which again leads you to so many other, unraveling or so much more unraveling, you do lose friends and you lose
Mm,
family. Now you gain friends and you gain people who are like family, who are like-minded. So, but it is and it's an incredibly pronounced transition. It really, really is. And it can be lonely in the early days because we're not naturally connectors because white supremacy loves it when we stay by ourselves and we're
mhm.
lone wolves. I'm a lone wolf. I'm going to face the world alone. Good luck with that, right? You will die alone too. Um, Harsh but true. I
Heard.
think what's been great about my husband is I just think he's smart to begin with and he's open-minded and he's willing and he's I think probably has always been a little bit more emotionally cued in than I was. And sometimes even now than I am. And so I think it has been very helpful. I will say though, I've had those moments where I'm like, what if Ned hadn't come on the journey with me, right? Because when we first got together, I think he was a registered Republican.
Okay.
And I'd been a Democrat for like 34 years. Not that I think those mean anything now, right? I don't think parties mean a thing. Um, but I will say that I've watched him morph over the years, and now I look at him and I'm like, "Why were you that again?" Like, and so it's been fun, I think, for both of us to watch the transition. And he was on a podcast the other day, and I heard him say something. Somebody said, "These girls," and he's like, "Are they girls or are they women?" And I was like, "Oh my gosh." Like when you overhear the little snippets, it's like kind of, I'm proud. I get proud of it, that it's piercing. It's coming through the brain.
That is awesome, and I can imagine he's as proud of you as you are of him in
He
those
says
moments.
so. Yeah, he says so. Uh,
All right, so social media,
yeah.
at least from my point of view, and I think from many others, that's been your vehicle to ask these questions, to be curious, to point out things that other people should be curious about. Um, ah, how is it working for you? Like, I want to just get a sense of for other leaders out there. One, when might they speak up on social media? When might they want to say something on social media? And two, if like based on your experience, if they can pick out maybe some advice or some tactics on how to use it effectively. What can you
Yeah.
tell us about your use of social media in terms of helping, what I will say is helping the world be a better place?
Yeah. Great question. The first thing I want to say is I have incredible privilege in working for myself because I don't answer to anybody. Now I do answer
Mm,
to clients, and I've had clients who've ditched me. Like, for example, Palestine is a hot issue, Israel is a hot issue, and I've had some clients who are Jewish, they are Zionist, they are, some of them have lived in Israel, and they've just said, I'm very uncomfortable with your position on this. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I guess we won't work together, right? I can do that. I mean, there's economic privilege in that. There's all kinds of privilege in that.
yeah,
It becomes very, very hard when you work for somebody else to really show who you are from an activist or a humanitarian level on social media. It's considered to be very radical to stand up and say even something as simple as, I think we need a ceasefire all over the world, right? Even to say you are anti-war, which I find ironic, because I think we should all be anti-war and pro-peace, right? Pro-diplomacy. That is radical. So I would just say that pick your battles, right? There are plenty of things you can do in real life that don't have to do with social media. One of the things I talk about a lot with women in my community, mutual aid. Mutual aid is not charity. Mutual aid is us coming together as a collective. Remember, no lone wolves, right? Solidarity and togetherness is what is going to get us there. And all these wonderful activists in the Black community, the Latina community, they've taught us this. There's a
yeah.
playbook, it exists. The problem is white people, we don't know about it because we've never done this work, right? Historically. So I think that if you can do mutual aid and help each other out, like we had somebody show up on LinkedIn the other day and she's lost her job, she's living in a hotel. And, I identify with that. When I was a kid, we lived in a motel for 6 months, and it was only 6 months too, but I remember it was hard. It was embarrassing. It was heartbreaking. There was a lot to it. And this notion that, yeah, me, Denise, I can't pull her out of that. But if I got 50 other women, right, and we all pitch in a couple bucks here and a couple bucks there, we can get her out of this and we can get her to a place where she's confident. Or maybe she doesn't want that. In this case, she more wanted leads on jobs. She's in the HR space and she wanted that. So you have to listen to the person first and, let them tell you what they need. Charity so often is, here's a free turkey, and I remember that because we used to get the free turkeys and all the free food too. And then people make you pose for a photo. Mutual aid is not that. Mutual aid is, what do you need? And then let's all pull together and give it to you. And all we want from you is pay it forward, right?
Mm,
Part of this society for mutual aid for other folks.
I love this. And I'm going to admit this concept of mutual aid is new to me, but I love the way you frame it
Thank you.
as give them what they want and need, not necessarily what you feel like giving them. Do it collectively, and the ask for the recipient is just pay it forward. I love that.
Pay it forward. That's all we need.
Let's pivot to inclusive leadership.
Yeah.
You are a coach, you work with a lot of people who are striving to be in the C-suite, striving to be CEOs, who are CEOs looking for help. We want to get a sense first of what challenges you see, what you see for them in terms of incorporating inclusion into their leadership approach. So, just based on your experience talking with, working with, observing people, can you name a few challenges you see in terms of why leaders might not be as inclusive in their leadership style or leadership actions as they could be?
One, I think it's because most have not done anti-racist work. So I think it is very, very hard. And I look at so many DEI programs that have failed that have nothing to do with the people running the programs. Sometimes they don't even have to do with intentions. Now, there are companies out there that are performative. So the intentions were never good to begin with, right? And it's very hard to build on something where, it was sort of a false premise anyway.
Yeah.
But for those companies that really did want to do the work, the problem is if you don't start from a place of anti-racism, I just don't know how you do the work, right? And so people have to be schooled in that on some level. And let's face it, sometimes it takes years. Look at me, like I'm still in it, right? And I've probably read 100 books on this stuff, and I'm not even I'm just scratching the surface because of my privilege and where I came from, right? And what my background and lived experience is. So I think the first thing is really some level of anti-racism instruction has to be done. So I do a workshop. I call it an amuse-bouche for anti-racism because that's literally all it is. It's 2 hours. It comes from a white lady. It's meant to not be as threatening as it might be coming from someone who doesn't look like me, right? And all I want it to do is have people go, oh, this wasn't that scary after all. And it made me think. And then someone like you, who is way more skilled, qualified, has more expertise, can come in and can really get into the meat of it. But I'm the softener, I'm the tenderizer, right? All I'm there for. And I think that most organizations need some sort of softening program, not coddling, but just to bring it in, introduce it all. And then they need to sort of make way for somebody who's got real expertise and chops to come in.
Yeah.
The second thing I think is vigilance. What I notice as a CEO, being a
Mm,
former CEO, being an executive, what you can't do is you cannot drop people who are, I'll say, who have historically been othered. And that could mean anything. It could be sexual orientation, how they identify from a gender perspective, right? How you identify from a religious perspective. You cannot just dump people into an organization that's largely white and hope everybody gets along and play the neutral thing. And I think a
yeah.
lot of companies play the I'm not taking sides. It almost, some companies where it's bad, it's sink or swim, right? Well, either she's going to get through or she's not. Well, let me be really clear. That Muslim woman who wears a hijab, she's not going to get through. She's going to be mobbed, harassed, bullied because she's other. And that is what people do. That is what white people in white spaces do. So, as
Mm,
the leader and leaders, you have to have your eyes on this. You have to have a program for onboarding. You have to have discussions with people and just let them know. I like to put people on notice. I'm looking for the following behaviors and I will be calling you out for the following behaviors. And that's very hard in corporate spaces because we're wimps, right?
define wimps there because, well, just define wimps because,
I think that most corporate spaces are people who just want other people to be, well, they'll either get along or they won't, right? And I don't think that's leadership. I think leadership sometimes has to be heavy-handed in the right way. Most of the time, I'm the person who's like, hey, you're an adult, you're self-directed, here's your outcomes, go do your work. But that said, when it comes to inclusivity and intentionality, you can't, I see this Black women. I see this with Black women, many of them my clients. They will drop a Black woman who has, she's overqualified because she's overqualified for just about everything, right? That's our world and that's what's required. We will know when we have true, equity when a Black woman can be average, right? So she comes in and she literally is supposed to be the change maker. Most of the time, they don't tell her she's going to be the change maker. She figures it out very quickly. And then what will happen is, as she goes about trying to make change, the folks who hired her and allegedly empowered her, but they didn't, they won't clear paths for her. They won't watch out for all the backbiting and the sabotage and all the things. And what ends up happening is, more often than not, they're going to grind her out of the culture. She's going to think there's something wrong with her. Usually she's going to come to me. That's when I inherit her as a coaching client. And then we got to build her confidence back up. And the hardest thing for me is, where am I supposed to send her? Right? Because I don't want to lie to her and be like, well, the next job will be so much better. Will it? Statistically in this country, probably not. Right?
yeah, what you were talking about the people who are othered internalizing it, is it me? And that's kind of the point at which you get them. I won't quote the poem, but there's one of my favorite poems talks about
Yeah.
that challenge. Like the main character sees something that's impossible, and the poem it's "Spiritual Chickens" by the poet Stephen Dobbins,
Love it.
and he says something like, "Given the choice of something broken, odd with, given the choice of something odd with the world or broken with your head, his head." This guy went with a broken head, and I think so many of us go with, "Oh, I'm broken.
Oof.
I've done something wrong." Not that I was living in a jacked up environment. A different analogy that a friend gave me is if a plant is not thriving, we don't blame the plant.
No.
Um, but in we would think about what is the gardener doing? Is this in the right soil? Like under the right conditions? But we don't treat human beings like that. We blame the other. We blame the person instead of thinking about like, have I just put, as you said, dropped this beautiful plant in this toxic environment?
Absolutely. The apocalypse. You've basically taken this wonderful, right?
Right.
It's the post-nuclear apocalypse. And to your point, you know, I think the reason, and I see this with all my clients who have been in a toxic environment, we internalize it because we can control it. It is very hard, and I know this for myself. I think as humans, we want to internalize those things because you don't want to. What woman, let's be fair, let's go back to a Black woman. What Black woman wants to admit, yeah, it's because I'm Black? They don't want to because their whole life they've been told you're trying to be a victim. Well, guess what? Sometimes I was victimized, right? And that feels terrible. Like me admitting it took so long to admit that I was sexually assaulted. Who goes, I'm a victim? Nobody wants to do that. You give up your agency. So nobody, we want to control it. We want to keep our agency. We want to keep our dignity. And we should be able to, but you got to have a leadership team that is going to support these people, right? And to do that, they got to admit that not all white situations are great situations because they're not, or not all overly straight, or wherever we lack in representation, overly Christian, you name it.
Yeah, you got to be able to name where there's room, where there are opportunities for progress.
Correct.
Let's move into the advice phase. I appreciate those two challenges about not having done the anti-racist work and about not being vigilant enough. So what kinds of advice might you give CEOs, leaders, C-suite executives around how they might lead and or create leadership environments that are more inclusive? And this doesn't have to be CEOs. It could be folks like you who are single person shops, like who are entrepreneurs. I just want
Yeah.
to get a sense of what your top pieces of advice would be for leaders in this world today.
I think first they got to do the work. So, like I said, I've got this anti-racist reading list that I've like literally shared, and it's branched out from, it's not just about race. It's branched into all kinds of other reading. It's anti-isms is what I should call it. So first they got to do the work, and they got to, start to really dig into it and dig into their own biases. At the same time, self-awareness and EQ work, it does not happen nearly enough. I hear this from a lot of my corporate clients. These folks who are coming up who are younger, and I think it's more pronounced because people are like, oh, it's the technology that made them not self-aware. I mean, maybe, okay, but I don't think that my generation was incredibly self-aware either, right? We did a lot of soothing with MTV and eating Doritos and latchkeys, and we spent a lot of time alone, people my age. So, I mean, I always say I had parents who loved me so much and neglected me incredibly. And I was not unusual for my time, right? It's just how they were taught to parent. And so I think that the first thing that we have to do is we have to educate on not only on the anti-racist side ourselves, we got to make the quest, but we also got to do self-awareness work. So I have like all kinds of exercises that I do with my clients. Some of the first ones we do, and they're wild questions. Like I do this one, it's 20 questions called Know Thyself. And they're really deep. Like I always say to people, like, come back to me in like 2 weeks. You're not going to do this, all at once. And I actually have it on my website. It's on the resources tab, and I make it available to everybody, totally free. You can download all kinds of stuff on there. But that Know Thyself exercise is on there. So I think it's more about teaching people self-awareness, teaching people how to give others the benefit of the doubt. Like I can tell you, I can look back on my career, and there are times when I was harder on women of color, people who were gay. I was, and I'd say, no, it's just a business issue I'm doubling down on. In hindsight now, no, no, no. I was extra nasty because I felt like I was superior and they were different. And you gotta be able to start unraveling that and owning that. The other thing I would say is for folks, vigilance and onboarding. So if you're bringing on new folks, anybody who is more diverse than your average straight white Christian person, right? I think that you got to be really thoughtful about scoping out who's going to help that person, right? And it's not just one who, it's many who's. So what I've started to recommend is my clients who go in who are folks of color, who are people who are, in any way beyond just, straight boring white Christian, right? I like to hire a coach not only for that person needs their coach that they can trust, but then the executive team needs to be coached on how they're going to welcome them and how they're going to bring them in and how they're going to self-interrogate their own BS, quite frankly. And I mean, it's almost like readying for a birth, right? It's like if you were going to have a kid tomorrow, you would have a nursery and you would bring all these things and you'd stock up and prepare. I really do think that if you want to be an inclusive culture, you have to prepare for the folks who aren't going to feel necessarily embraced right out of the gate.
I love the pieces of advice. I want to run through them a bit just to underline
Go for it.
um, the doing the anti-racism, self-awareness, emotional intelligence work.
Yeah.
Um, uh, Learning how to give people the benefit of the doubt. I think a lot of us intellectually get that, but in terms of behaviors, I
Yeah.
think I speak for myself. I definitely have work to do there. And then the whole what I'll put under the umbrella of preparing the environment, preparing the soil for to be inclusive. Coaches for the leaders of that environment,
Yes.
as well as coaches for the people coming in, scoping out who are going to be the team of helpers to
Yeah.
make this work. And I loved your analogy about birth. Like we don't expect babies to advocate for themselves, and we're talking about grown adults, right? Who
Absolutely.
are competent and have lots of skills. And we've also talked about how grown adults don't have a whole set of skills that they probably need in order to work together in an inclusive way where everyone can be the best version of themselves.
Right.
I love all of these. Uh, and I'll come to this, I think, at the end too. You mentioned that you have items on your resource page. Can you just talk a little bit about the resources that you have available that people watching this may want access to or have questions about, or like share some of um, how can others learn from your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. So first and foremost, if you go to my website, it's Themy, Themy, LLC.com, and you'll see right at the top on the menu, there's a tab for resources. Go to resources. They're all PDFs, and it's a wide range. So the Know Thyself 20 questions is on there. It's a great one for self-awareness. I've got everybody's in strat planning right now, so I've got a strategic planning kit, sort of your toolkit. So if you want to kind of wow folks at work with your strategic planning framework knowledge, you can go get nerdy and do that. My anti-racist reading list, I believe, is on there as well. 10 best business books I've ever read. So there's a lot of stuff. I just did one on Crush the Interview. Like, how can you go in? One thing that I was really good at when I was in corporate spaces is I used to interview really well. And I sort of had a blueprint for it. So I've made that into a worksheet. You can download that. So you can just go get all that stuff for free. The one that I was looking at my stats the other day, the one that's getting the most traction is one-on-one agenda for your weekly meeting with your manager. So I have one for people managers, if you're a people manager, and then one for individual contributors. I believe when you do a one-on-one every week with your manager, it's not their meeting, it's your meeting. Right. And it's really about development. I mean, yes, you want to keep them looped in, tell them what's on the radar, manage the narrative. So that one's getting a ton of traction.
That's really exciting, and I'm glad that we're able to help amplify the resources that you have
Yeah.
because you are doing such great work.
Thanks.
And that's actually the pivot I want to make next
Yeah.
to basically what advice you might give for other leaders, whether they're executives, CEOs, entrepreneurs, who do want to make change. You've been doing some great things, moving the needle,
Yeah.
not only for yourself, but for a lot of others, supporting a lot of other people, a lot of other organizations. If there is a CEO or entrepreneur executive listening to this interview right now who wants to like sees an issue, they want to move the needle, they want to be a force for good, what kinds of advice, and I think you're going to pull from things you've already said, but what kinds of advice might you give them about how they can create positive change?
First things first, if you haven't been to therapy, go, because as a human, you've probably been through some sort of trauma. And
Mm.
I have people say to me, my childhood was good. Good. I'm awesome. I don't hear that very often. So I know, really. But I think there are people who walk among us. They are like superhuman who had good childhoods, right? So, but that's not to say life throws trauma at you at different stages. Maybe it was a divorce. Maybe it was a really bad breakup. Go to therapy and get to know yourself a little bit. Once you've done that, get yourself a coach. I feel like every person who is on the cusp of being an exec or is an exec, you need a coach. You need somebody to coach you, to advise you with options, right? You could go this way, you could go this way. And then I would say also just read. I mean, I'm a book nerd, but like expose yourself to all kinds of wild, wacky, different things from different disciplines. We've talked about anti-racism, and that's a huge body of work that literally I'll explore that for the rest of my life, and I probably won't even scratch the surface. but I love history. I think history is very subversive. If you're somebody who's not a big reader, the Throughline podcast on NPR is insanely good, and they will walk you through historical stuff. They did one on Sudan and South Sudan, gave us, the 411 on the conflict. They gave us the history of Palestine. So they're very good about educating on us on what we need now.
Those are excellent resources. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're so welcome.
Um, I want to hear, I would like you to share a
Yeah.
bit about something that you're currently working on or will be working on soon that excites you. Like, what's a current or upcoming project that's exciting you that it would be help that you want to share with other folks?
There's two that I'm working on. So the first is EQ School. So it fits right into what we're talking about. Most managers have never been taught how to manage, and most managers don't have great EQ. That's just the way we are. Apparently, I was doing some research on this the other day, and I'm like, I wonder what countries have good EQ, because I feel like America has terrible EQ, right? The Philippines is number one for EQ. And it's funny because one of my clients is Filipina American. And I'm like, hey, I'm gonna run this by you. Do you feel like your people, right? Because her parents came
Yeah.
from the Philippines. She's first generation American. I'm like, do you feel like your people are more emotionally intelligent? She's like, I don't know. I got to think about that. But there was a whole index, and like America lands in like 50 amongst all the countries in the world. No, I thought it'd be worse. I'm gonna be honest with you. I was pleasantly surprised. But no, it was kind of wild. So I want to understand a little bit more about Filipino culture. But one, get to know yourself, and that's something most managers don't have. So I want to do a school. It's going to be some sort of a program that folks can send managers at all levels through, and we can really break down how to have great emotional intelligence and how to care about people, respond to people, right? All ages. The other thing that I'm working on is it's meant to be super affordable too. I meant to mention that. I'm also working on a scholarship program. So I've been given scholarships since I started this business in 2021. I've given out almost $800,000 in scholarships. And up until now, the scholarships have gone to women who are in transition, unemployed, or underemployed. Okay. And I've had both founders in the program as well as folks who are working at a nonprofit, for an organization or for profit. This year or 2025, I'm stepping it up. I'm going to split it into two tracks. And one track's going to be for founders, whether new or established. The other is going to be for folks who are working for an organization. There will be 12 women, it's all women, in each cohort. It's a full 12-month program in 2025. And they get 2 hours of group coaching with me once a month. They get solo coaching sessions with me once a quarter. They get access to all my workshops. I think I have 17 or 18 workshops now over Zoom. And I'm going to take 24. It's the first time I've ever added the group coaching and the individual coaching component. They've always gotten kind of a 1 year pass to my workshops. So I'm taking it up a notch, and I'm excited because I've had women graduate from my scholarship program and go on to work at like Fortune 20 companies. So these are women who are already, they have knowledge, they have skills, they have expertise. Super psyched. 65% of the women who've done my scholarship program are not white. So I give first crack preference to women with great qualifications, expertise, who don't look like me. So I love that program.
These are both really exciting and cool. I have a follow-up to the
Yeah.
the scholarship
Yeah.
program. You talked about how the participants in previous versions of that program have been incredibly capable and how they've gone to good to great things. They went
Yes.
from good to great.
Yes.
What what would you say they might have been missing or not focusing on? Like, what was the shift from that good to great, do you think?
Confidence. You feel like
Mm,
crap. A lot of them have been laid off. And do I have stats to prove this? I bet they exist. I think women who don't look like me get laid off more often than women who do.
mm.
And it makes, think about it. If I'm already twice as accomplished as everybody else and I get laid off, then I'm really hitting myself hard. So I think it's
Yeah,
nice for them to be in community with a wide variety of women. We're back to community
community
again,
again. Yeah.
lone wolf in it, right? And I think it's just a matter of them getting a little bit of confidence, right? And it just being in that community gives it to them, and then they go on and do what they were meant to do anyway. It's funny, people are like, oh, Denise made me. No, I didn't. I nudged you. I'm like, I just
I
nudged.
like the nudging.
Yeah,
And also, I'd like to make a friendly amendment, not
yeah,
uh, uh,
yeah,
fairly uninformed, obviously, that
yeah.
you created the environment. You helped build that
I'll
soil,
take that.
that
Sure.
this nutrient soil in which they could develop that confidence and community.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm totally down with that. They already had it all. You know what I mean? It's them not being employed had nothing to do with them, or being underemployed legit didn't have anything to do with their skill set or their qualifications. Just didn't.
Although I would imagine that at that level, for
Yeah.
smart, capable, like aggressive, I won't say aggressive, let's say A-type folks who
Yeah.
like are results oriented,
Yes.
it feels like I can imagine it would feel like if I am not hitting all the marks in this area of my life work, that
Yes.
it is it's a blow to me personally.
Oh, absolutely. And all the work. And I think it's also helpful as a coach, especially with women who, are of a different race from me. I will say to people, like if I have a client the other day who's Asian American, and I'm like, you're getting hit with the model minority thing. People, she's in a powerful role. She's asking people to do things that are change. She's a change maker. Again,
Mhm.
she's a change maker. And they're like, who is this woman who is supposed to be quiet and meek? And she's not quiet and meek, and she's never been quiet and meek, but so I think it's just helpful for folks to be seen and have somebody, especially someone who looks like me, say it out loud.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, you're not imagining it. It's a thing.
I appreciate it. It's you're not broken, the world is odd.
You're broken. Yeah, exactly.
I love that. One last question, and then I'm just gonna wrap things up for us. And sorry about surprising you for this, but I don't think it'll be a surprise entirely. Queenmaker. I am intrigued, and I've done a little research about like why you call yourself that. But for the folks who may not be familiar, can you talk about what Queenmaker means to you and why you've taken on that imprimatur?
Yes. So it's sort of interesting. So you have to know a little bit about my family's heritage and background. So I'm like 83% Irish, Northern Irish. And so I, during the pandemic, went down the rabbit hole. We had our farm taken from the British. They came in and basically, a lot like Palestine, were like, yeah, thanks, this is ours now. You can farm it and be a serf, but So I hate anything that has to do with royalty. I'm not a big fan of, like, the queen and all that stuff. That said, throughout our lives, we hear about, I've always been a student of power, and you hear about kingmakers, these men who stood behind, kind of like the marionette, and made great men great, propelled them to greatness. You never hear about anyone behind women. And that's because I'm not saying that there aren't communities that push women forward. There are. We've talked about that a little bit. But especially, in this very white supremacy world, we women have to do it on their own a lot of times. They don't have that person propelling them, nudging, as we talked about, creating the right environment. So when I started this business, I was like, okay, I want to be the woman who's in the background. I want to be the woman who's propelling this women to greatness. They've already got all the skills. It's just me saying, maybe make this choice instead of this choice, or this is going to be better for you, go here. Right. And so it is interesting though, because as I've started to get more male clients, which I'm really excited about. I'm still like 95% female clients, and probably always will be majority, but I'm getting some men who are like, hey, I love the work that you do with women. And I think you're really in touch, and I like your style. So that's been sort of rewarding too, because it's nice to see that there are some really good guys out there who are like, okay, this doesn't turn me off. In fact, I find it, something that's a selling point.
I love that story, and it doesn't surprise me about the men.
Me neither.
Speaking for myself,
Yeah,
I'm of the mind that if you can help people who have for example, black women who have all of these cards stacked against them, then
yes,
clearly there's some wisdom in there that would help me as well.
absolutely.
Uh, Denise, thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your journey and your leadership insights. It's been such a pleasure hearing about your experiences, as well as the lessons you've learned along the way and the incredible resources that you're willing to share with folks. I can't thank you enough for the time and the privilege of listening and talking with you.
Thank you so much. I'm honored to be here, and you ask great questions. So it's a really nice way. You kind of lit my day up. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. And for those of you watching, for our viewers, if you've enjoyed hearing from Denise Conroy today, first of all, check out her website, check out her resources, follow her, please, please, please. And also, don't miss other Break the Norm Leadership Break the Norm Leadership interviews. If your organization is interested in learning how Break the Norm Leadership can help you develop your greatest asset, your people, click on the link below. Uh, I hope that we have earned the privilege of your time and attention. Thank you for joining me, Ramy and Pierre with Break the Norm Leadership, and Denise Conroy, the Queen Maker, today for this conversation. Take care.